36,000 people died, not in a war, not in a famine, not in a plague. They died because an island exploded. On the morning of August the 27th, 1883, the Earth produced the loudest sound ever recorded in human history. The explosion was so powerful that sailors 3,000 miles away thought their ships were under attack. Barometers across the planet suddenly jumped as a shockwave ripped through the atmosphere. Windows shattered hundreds of miles from the source. In Australia, people reported hearing a sound like heavy artillery firing from the horizon. But the most terrifying part wasn't the noise. It was what the explosion did to the ocean. Because when the volcano on the island of Krakatoa detonated, part of the island didn't just erupt, it collapsed. The center of the volcano fell into the sea, displacing billions of tons of water in seconds. And the ocean answered. Walls of water up to 40 meters high began racing toward the coastlines of Java and Sumatra. Entire towns vanished. Ships were thrown miles inland. By the time the sea finally fell silent, more than 36,000 people were dead. And the catastrophe had begun long before the explosion. For months, the island had been trying to warn the world. Almost no one understood the signs. The waves that erased entire towns did not come from the open ocean. They came from a single place. A small volcanic island sitting in the middle of a narrow waterway known as the Sunda Strait. This strait lies between Java and Sumatra, in what is now Indonesia. In the 19th century, it was one of the busiest shipping routes in Southeast Asia. Steamships carrying spices, rubber tea, and coffee passed through these waters almost every day, and nearly every ship that crossed the strait could see it. Krakatoa. From a distance, the island looked harmless. A green volcanic cone rising out of tropical water. Palm trees covered its slopes. Fishing villages lined the nearby coasts. For generations, people living along the strait had grown used to the occasional rumble from the mountain. Indonesia sits on one of the most volatile geological regions on Earth. A chain of volcanoes formed, where massive tectonic plates collide beneath the ocean floor. Most of the time, these volcanoes release pressure slowly, a tremor, a cloud of ash. A small eruption, but in 1883 something inside Krakatoa began to change. Deep beneath the island, magma was rising toward the surface, and when that magma began to interact with the surrounding ocean, the island was transformed into something far more dangerous than a volcano. It became a bomb waiting to explode. To understand why Krakatoa exploded, you have to look beneath the ocean floor. Far below the Sunda Strait, two enormous pieces of the Earth's crust were slowly colliding. The Indo-Australian tectonic plate was pushing northward, and the Eurasian plate was forcing it downward. This process is called subduction. Imagine two giant conveyor belts crashing into each other. One of them is forced under the other, sinking deep into the mantle of the Earth. As that slab of rock descends, temperatures rise, pressure builds, and the rock begins to melt. That melting rock becomes magma superheated liquid stone filled with gas. Over time, the magma rises toward the surface. It collects beneath volcanic islands like Krakatoa, building pressure inside underground chambers. Most of the time, that pressure escapes gradually, a tremor, a plume of ash. A small eruption that releases gas from the system, but sometimes the volcano seals itself shut. Gas can no longer escape. Pressure continues to build, and the entire mountain begins to behave like a giant sealed pressure cooker. But in 1883, something even more dangerous happened. Something that turned Krakatoa from a volcano into a bomb. Because beneath the island, rising magma began to interact with seawater. When superheated magma meets cold ocean water, the water flashes instantly into steam. Steam expands violently, up to 1,700 times its original volume in a fraction of a second. That expansion creates an explosive force capable of shattering rock, ripping apart volcanic chambers, and launching entire sections of an island into the air. And once that reaction begins, it doesn't stop with a single explosion. It triggers a chain reaction beneath the volcano. One blast exposing more magma hitting more seawater, each explosion tearing the island further apart. By August of 1883, Krakatoa had become something far more unstable than anyone realized. It wasn't just erupting, it was tearing itself open from the inside. And when the final detonation came, an entire island would disappear. Months before the final explosion, the signs were already there. Most people ignored them, but a few were paying attention. One of them was Captain Willem van der Velde, a Dutch merchant captain navigating the busy shipping lanes of the Sunda Strait. In the summer of 1883, his steamship passed the volcanic island of Krakatoa regularly. At first, the mountain looked no different than usual. Then one afternoon, he noticed something strange. A towering column of dark ash was rising straight into the sky. As the ship moved closer, the air began to change. Ash drifted down onto the deck like gray snow. The sunlight faded behind a thick volcanic haze.
All hands,
Van der
secure
Velde
the deck
later
and
wrote
brace
in
for
his ship's
impact.
log that the
We have
mountain
incoming.
sounded
Yes,
like
Captain,
distant
move,
cannon
move.
fire. Low rumbles
Brace for
rolled
impact.
across the
All
water
hands,
again
now.
and again. He had sailed these waters for years. He had never
What do we
heard
do, Captain
anything
van
like
der
it.
Velde?
Nearly 40 miles away, along the northern coast of Java, a fisherman named Hadi Santoso was noticing something even stranger. The sea itself had begun to behave differently. Some mornings, the tide rose far higher than expected. Other days, the water suddenly pulled away from the shore. Fishing boats drifted strangely in the currents. The ocean felt unsettled. Santoso told other fishermen that the sea seemed angry. Most of them dismissed the idea. Indonesia was full of volcanoes. They rumbled all the time. Life simply continued. But both men were witnessing the same warning signs. Deep beneath Krakatoa magma was forcing its way upward through the island. The pressure was growing, and the explosions were becoming stronger. Within weeks, the volcano would unleash a blast powerful enough to tear the island apart and send the ocean racing toward the shore. By late August of 1883, the warnings that Captain van der Velde and Hadi
Close the bridge
Santoso
wing door
had
now.
witnessed
Captain,
were no
the
longer
cargo
subtle.
is shifting.
Hold the
Krakatoa
course.
was
Brace
erupting
yourselves.
almost constantly. Ash clouds rose miles into the sky. Explosions rolled across the Sunda Strait like distant thunder. Ships reported shockwaves rattling their hulls as they passed through the region. But nothing prepared anyone for what happened on the morning of August 27th. At 5:30 a.m., the volcano unleashed an explosion so violent that it shattered the summit of the island. The blast column shot more than 20 miles into the atmosphere. Ash turned morning into night across much of western Java. Then less than an hour later, a second explosion tore through the volcano. Even larger, even louder. Each detonation cracked open more of the volcanic structure, exposing magma chambers beneath the island. And then came the moment that changed everything. At 10:02 a.m., Krakatoa produced the most powerful explosion of the entire eruption. The sound was so loud it ruptured the eardrums of sailors 40 miles away. People thousands of miles across the Indian Ocean reported hearing the blast. Barometers around the world recorded the pressure wave as it circled the Earth multiple times. But the sound was only the beginning. Because the explosion didn't just blow rock into the sky, it destroyed the island itself. The center of Krakatoa collapsed into the ocean. An enormous section of the volcano vanished beneath the sea. Billions of tons of seawater rushed into the empty crater in seconds, and the ocean responded instantly. The collapse displaced unimaginable volumes of water, generating massive waves that began racing outward from the shattered island. Walls of water rising higher and higher as they sped toward the surrounding coasts. Within minutes, those waves were heading straight for the shores of Java and Sumatra, and the people living there had almost no time to escape. What followed would become one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in recorded history. When the tsunami waves reached the coasts of Java and Sumatra, entire towns disappeared within minutes. Some waves rose more than 40 meters high, taller than most buildings in the coastal villages they struck. Ports, markets, and fishing communities were swallowed by the sea. Ships anchored in harbors were lifted like toys and hurled far inland. In the town of Merak, witnesses later reported a steamship carried nearly 3 kilometers from the shoreline before crashing down to dry land. Across the Sunda Strait, dozens of coastal settlements were erased. By the time the water finally retreated, the scale of destruction was almost impossible to comprehend. More than 36,000 people were dead. Hundreds of villages had been destroyed. But the disaster did not end at the shoreline, because the explosion that triggered the tsunami had also sent shockwaves through the atmosphere powerful enough to circle the entire planet. And in the months that followed, The eruption of Krakatoa would leave marks on the Earth that scientists could measure for years. The explosion of Krakatoa did more than destroy an island. It changed the atmosphere of the entire planet. The pressure wave from the blast traveled around the Earth at least 7 times, recorded by barometers thousands of miles away. Ash and volcanic dust rose high into the stratosphere, spreading across the globe. For months afterward, people around the world reported strange blood-red sunsets from Europe to North America. Scientists later realized that Krakatoa had injected millions of tons of material into the upper atmosphere, altering how sunlight passed through the sky. But perhaps the most haunting fact is this: the loudest sound in recorded history came from a place that was peaceful only months earlier. A quiet island, a familiar volcano. A reminder that sometimes the most catastrophic forces on Earth build slowly, silently, until the moment they finally break.